During the recent 2023 UN summit, Niger was obstructed from participating in the General Assembly discussion. This was a wicked portrayal of what the West could do with countries wanting to be independent and uninfluenced by the West. Even if other African countries like Mali and Burkina Faso were invited, Niger was not, and this exposed a lot about what the Western leaders are thinking. Don't forget that coups took place in Mali and Burkina Faso too, and Niger is not alone. So why did the UN chief allow them to participate while blocking Niger? What shocking Niger was planning to reveal at the UN General Assembly that the UN chief had to ban it and not allow it to have the stage? Well, even if Niger was obstructed, it has slammed the UN chief and said things no other country would. Not only that, but Mali's leader spoke about this illegal and unfair obstruction, standing right in the General Assembly and seeing Western leaders in the eye. What's the whole story and what heated things were said? Let's find out and know the whole story. The military government of Niger has accused United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres of obstructing Niger's full participation in the UN's annual meeting of world leaders. They claim that this is being done to appease France, Niger's former colonial ruler, and its allies. Well, there is not a speck of doubt in that, and it's not just an accusation, it's a truth. The decision not to allow the junta's representative to address the UN General Assembly in New York is seen as potentially harmful to resolving the crisis in Niger, according to Colonel Major Amadou Abdrahmani, a spokesperson for the officers who ousted Nigerian President Mohamed Bazoum in a coup in July. The junta had hoped to have Niger's former ambassador to the United Nations, Bakary Yao Sangare, who was appointed as foreign minister after the coup, speak on their behalf at the General Assembly. However, Bakary did not receive the necessary credentials to attend. The deposed Nigerian government's foreign minister had sent a letter to the United Nations, informing them of the end of Bakary's functions as Niger's permanent representative, as per Stéphane Dujarric, Guterres' spokesperson. The junta spokesperson accused the former minister, Hassoumi Massoudou, of high treason and alleged that the UN chief Antonio Guterres was aligning with France and the European Union's determination to punish Niger and its people for their patriotic choice. Abdrahmane also criticized the West African regional bloc, ECOWAS, for interference. Niger gave an official statement saying that in cooperation with France and the two French-speaking heads of state of ECOWAS, the United Nations Secretary-General has deviated from his mission by obstructing Niger's full participation in the 78th session of the UN General Assembly. It raises questions about the neutrality of the United States, an international organization established to resolve all global problems through dialogue. However, when the standards are changed and countries are banned from attending summits, it manifests the ulterior reasons behind why the UN was established. The Niger junta has appointed civilians to key positions, including Prime Minister, as part of a transitional government that may remain in power for up to 3 years. However, ECOWAS and France still recognize Bazoum as Niger's legitimate leader. That's a denial that they will soon regret. You should know that the military leaders in Niger criticized UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres particularly, accusing him of obstructing their participation in the United Nations General Assembly. This tells a lot about how the West gets its things done by putting puppet secretary-generals who put a signature under everything the West says. In a public television statement, the military condemned the actions of UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, labeling them as perfidious. They argued that these actions were likely to undermine any efforts to resolve the crisis in Niger. Bakary Yao Sangare, who had served as Niger's ambassador to the UN before the coup and currently holds the position of foreign minister, was designated to represent Niger at the General Assembly. The military statement alleged that Guterres not only refused to acknowledge the official list of Niger's delegates, but also accommodated the fanciful request of the former Foreign Affairs Minister, Hassoumi Massoudou, to revoke Niger's permanent representative to the United Nations. The military further emphasized that Niger strongly rejected and denounced what they perceived as interference in the internal affairs of a sovereign state by Mr. Guterres. No doubt the coup has faced strong criticism from Western governments and international organizations, including the United Nations, which is currently convening its General Assembly of World Leaders in New York. But that does not mean Niger can be banned from participating. What about the long speeches and advocates of freedom of speech? You should know that the obstruction was done using technical tactics, so it is not explicit that the UN did that internationally. Not only the UN, but ECOWAS is being used as a tool and lapdog by the West to legitimize a military intervention against Niger. Earlier, the sanctions imposed by ECOWAS and the West African Economic and Monetary Union have had a severe impact on Niger's population, causing a shortage of essential supplies, including pharmaceuticals, basic food items, and electricity. Niger, a landlocked country, is particularly affected by the disruption of its power supply, as a significant portion of its electricity comes from Nigeria, which has suspended these supplies. Consequently, multinational organizations have also severed their connections with Niger. It's clear that ECOWAS is betraying Africa, fading the very purpose of economic independence and autonomy. It's being used as an instrument by France to pressurize Niger, but this will not work. Following this, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Guinea have dealt a significant blow to the economic community of West African states by pledging their support for the current junta in power in Niger. Despite ECOWAS's threat of military intervention if the deposed leader, Mohamed Bazoum, is not reinstated. Mali and Burkina Faso, both governed by juntas, jointly issued a statement declaring that any military intervention against Niger would be regarded as an act of war. It was explicitly said that the interim governments of Burkina Faso and Mali warned that any military intervention against Niger will amount to a declaration of war against Burkina Faso and Mali. Furthermore, both nations indicated that they might withdraw from ECOWAS if the regional bloc intervened militarily in neighboring Niger. Their statement clearly said that the transitional governments of Burkina Faso and Mali warned that any military intervention against Niger could lead to Burkina Faso and Mali's withdrawal from ECOWAS and the adoption of legitimate defense measures in support of the armed forces and people of Niger. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Additionally, Guinea's transitional government CNRD, also led by a junta, distanced itself from ECOWAS and argued that intervention would disintegrate the regional bloc. It criticized the sanctions imposed by ECOWAS and vowed not to implement them. Guinea highlighted that the focus of regional leaders should be on addressing the strategic and socio-economic challenges facing the ECOWAS region and fulfilling the aspirations of its young populations, rather than solely concentrating on the fate of deposed presidents. But one question rises here. Why is the West focusing on and blocking Niger, only even though Burkina Faso and Mali are also ruled by military juntas? Well, it turns out that the extent to which Niger crushed and destroyed French influence in Africa is the major reason. It became the graveyard of the post-colonial French Empire, encouraging other African countries to rise and kick France out. It had become clear that if France lost Niger, it would lose everything, which is a reality now. However, instead of accepting the reality, France is trying its best to cling to Niger and reverse what has been done. It's impossible, but France wants Niger's junta to reinstate its former president so he could be once again the French puppet. On July 26th, Niger experienced a coup d'etat led by General Abdourahmane Tiani, a young Nigerian military leader, in collaboration with a group of his fellow officers. This coup in Niger stands out from many others in West Africa, as it wasn't orchestrated by France. In fact, General Tiani holds a strong antipathy towards France, viewing it as an oppressive power that has exploited Niger's natural resources and perpetuated poverty among its people, all in service of French interests. Tiani successfully ousted President Mohamed Bazoum, who was perceived as being loyal to France, and established a new government with 21 ministers, including 3 generals responsible for defense, interior, and sports. This was the start of the fall of France in Africa. France has substantial interests in Niger, primarily due to its uranium resources, which supply approximately 20% of France's uranium requirements. Reports estimate that 1 out of every 3 light bulbs in France is powered by uranium sourced from Niger, even as a staggering 90% of Nigerians lack access to electricity. Furthermore, Niger has been compelled to make compensation payments to France for the conclusion of colonization and the subjugation of its people, while France continues to control the national reserves of the African nation. Hence, the end of French influence in Niger means cracks in French foreign policy about Africa, which means France will be left with literally nothing. Colonial nations like France were built on the wealth exploited from Africa, and if this stops, France will fall. Therefore, the West is trying to portray this coup as something threatening democracy. However, they pay little attention to the thousands of Nigerians who have expressed support for the junta through street demonstrations and those who have protested in front of the French military base in Niamey. Not only that, but many Nigerians believe that France has released terrorist agents to destabilize the country in a bid to reinstate Bazoum and regain control over its natural resources. The junta has already accused France of releasing terrorists responsible for the deaths of 17 Nigerian troops. France is sparing no effort in its bid to preserve its influence in Niger, fully aware of the importance of securing a prominent role among the world's leading economic powers. According to El Hadji Idi Abdu, Vice President of the Alliance for Peace and Security in Niger, France is allegedly leveraging its sway within the economic community of West African states to advocate for potential military intervention in Niger. For Paris, ensuring Niger remains within its sphere of influence is an overarching priority. A French withdrawal from Niger would not only disrupt its geopolitical standing, but also see it plummet from the 7th to the 30th spot among the world's largest economies. It's clear that France's commitment to retaining Niger within its sphere is evident in its mobilization of ECOWAS and all available resources to exert control over Niger. Surrendering Niger would signify a loss reaching everything in France. Therefore, losing Niger would equate to losing everything. This is a struggle for survival, which is why France has elevated the Niger issue to the agenda of its National Defense and Security Council. That's the very reason France is using the United Nations to obstruct Niger from the General Assembly. You should know that France has been urged to depart. The agreement binding it to Niger has been broken. However, due to France's military superiority and veto power, it refuses to vacate Niger. This is the stark reality we are witnessing, a law of the jungle. The world must know that a military intervention, already deemed illegal since there is no official document from ECOWAS or the West African Economic and Monetary Union authorizing or prescribing it, represents a series of illegitimate actions. It has become evident to all that France is manipulating ECOWAS and the United Nations. In contrast to other colonial powers like Britain, which swiftly withdrew from their former African territories, France has held on to its presence. Whether driven by a sense of responsibility for the consequences of colonialism or a desire to continue reaping the benefits of its former holdings, France has remained engaged. For more than 6 decades, Paris has maintained involvement in African politics and economics, cultivating a system known as Francafrique. French officials had direct lines to favored presidents, and French businesses secured lucrative contracts. 14 nations in West and Central Africa, including Niger, used the CFA franc currency, backed by France, which provided exchange rate stability coveted by former British colonies. However, it also served the interests of French investors and African elites who enjoyed French luxuries purchased with hard currency. France readily deployed its military when needed, intervening in Ivory Coast during civil unrest in 2002, again in 2011 when Laurent Gbagbo refused to step down, and 7 times in the Central African Republic since gaining independence. In 2013, the French Air Force aided in ousting Islamist militants in northern Mali who posed a threat to Bamako. All this seems to vanish if Niger officially gets out of the influence of France. Now you can understand why France is ready to bet everything when the question is about Niger. Getting Niger back means preserving the influence, while losing it means the end of France in Africa. Now, this is a reality as France's 20 former African colonies have united to finally get rid of France. In Senegal, activists burned the CFA franc and targeted French-owned businesses. In Mali, there was a celebration when the military regime expelled French troops last year. All this is due to the seed of courage Niger sowed. France's loss has translated into Russia's gain. When French soldiers struggled to quell rebellion in the Central African Republic, President Faustin Archange Touadéra turned to Wagner mercenaries. These mercenaries now oversee various aspects of the country, from gold mines to Touadéra's schedule. In Mali, the military leaders sought Wagner's assistance after expelling what they referred to as the French junta. If Russia gets more ground in Africa, it will be a loss for the entire Western world, including France and the US. That's the reason why Niger has become the focal point for the West to regain its influence. With the fall of Niger's civilian government, considered France's last resort ally, France's influence in the Sahel appears to be waning. Ever since General Abdourahmane Tiani orchestrated the ousting of Niger's President Mohamed Bazoum, French President Emmanuel Macron has held a position. Paris recognizes no legitimate authority but Bazoum's. And guess what? That's the same narrative the United Nations is following. Instead of listening to Niger and ending their colonial mindset, countries like France are exacerbating the situation. It's using international organizations like the United Nations as its tools, which will further make more African nations disillusioned about the UN. Nobody is paying attention to that. But if the African continent collectively decided to end their membership in the UN, the world would face a major shock. For the UN to continue, it has to ensure that it stays neutral and allows every country to express itself freely. Obstructing Niger from participating in the UN General Assembly debate does no harm to Niger. However, it exposes the West in the true face of the UN, which is no more than a West-led organization and a lapdog which likes to play its little games. The UN should understand that the succession of coups targeting French-speaking nations necessitates a comprehensive reorientation of engagement with the African region. Instead of closing doors on African nations like Niger, they should be invited and welcomed, because if they are not, it will backfire for the West. Instead of furthering the broader narrative of the Western world, the United Nations should step forward and re-engage with Niger. It has to be remembered that it's not an organization established for Western interests. Even if the world knows who the UN is loyal to, the superficial image of the UN is also being exposed now. What do you think? Why the UN chief and the Western leaders did not want Niger to be at the UN summit? Were they scared that Niger would boldly say things which would expose them? Let us know what you think about the UN's double standards and being a lapdog for the West. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.